Good morning, welcome to our Sunday message, New Day family. So this week we've had some pretty exciting news that we're going to be able to return to gathering as a church. And as we begin to think about that and what it actually looks like, I just want to reflect and think this morning about our role as a church as we do this. It's been both fascinating and wonderful for me to see the groundswell of enthusiasm to get back to church, and there's definitely something biblical about that. For those of you who heard any of my mini-series on the Psalms, thinking about lament at the start of this crisis, I did something on Psalm 42 where it clearly talks about the community of God coming together in one place to worship him and fellowship. And it's definitely significant. However, that isn't the blueprint for the church as we know it. Yes, it's important, but the church is and always has been meant to be missional. It was never God's final intention for it to be confined and defined in a rigid way. We're meant to be organic and fluid and flexible and mobile and constantly moving and seeking the last, the least and the lost in society. And let's remember, while we've been locked down, the church has still been breaking out across the nation, even across the globe, and breaking into people's hearts, breaking into people's homes where church has not been a household word, really. We've been reaching people in their hardship and difficulty. And that, for me, is the church. And in fact, I would dare to say, I believe we've never been more the church than we have during this global crisis, the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. Certainly not in the last generation. I appreciate that's an incredibly bold statement, but my sense is as our doors open again, it isn't time for us to let up and settle down and pull up our comfy chair and sit down and say, phew, it's over, we made it. It's time to press in. It's time to keep going. It's time to continue being dynamic and seeking those people out, seeking to establish God's kingdom in the farthest and the hardest places. I want to say to us this morning, it's not how we come back in the sense of how we come back to gather. It's really how we continue to remember the poor in society. Let me define that for us a little bit. When I use the word poor in a biblical context, I'm talking about those who are marginalised in any way and just less fortunate than others. That could be right now as simple as those who can't return to church with us for many reasons: health, work, shielding, fear, who knows? But it could really be as simple as that. And as we express our gratitude and we're just thankful to be back in the house of the Lord, we mustn't be so selfish as to overlook the needs of others as we sense our own needs being met. I'm going to look at a slightly more unusual portion of the Bible today, but I really feel this story helps illustrate this point well. So we're going to look at the book of Ruth. I'm going to read a few verses. I'm going to take snippets from a couple of chapters that don't really seem to mean anything, but I'll frame them out as we go, and hopefully it's going to build quite a profound story that will speak to us today. So, Ruth 2 and verse 8. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the dressels and drink what the young men have drawn." Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favour in your eyes that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" Well, let's put that into some kind of form for what we want to do this morning. So Ruth is a Moabite. She's a foreigner. She's not part of Israel. And she's been living with her mother-in-law in Moab, and both their husbands have died. Now, Naomi, the mother-in-law, is from Bethlehem in Judah. And there's a famine in Moab, so they've decided to return to Bethlehem, to Israel. What's important to note at this point is Moab is a nation that historically has quite a checkered past with Israel. So here in our passage we've just read, Boaz has given Ruth assurance that she won't be harmed, she won't be abused. And actually, if you read further down in the passage, Naomi picks up on this fact and she praises God for Boaz's protection of Ruth. The point is, of course, it clearly wasn't safe for Ruth to be where she was as a foreigner doing what she was doing. And we'll come back to that. Ruth and Naomi have arrived in Bethlehem and they've got an immediate practical need. They've got nothing. They're widows. They need food and they're in complete dire straits. And this is really what life as a widow would have looked like for them. There was no social welfare system at that time, of course. However, the culture in those days did allow for the ministry of gleaning. And what that is when the harvest was gathered, those who were reaping, who were picking up the sheaves of corn and barley, if anything fell on the floor, they deliberately left it behind. And it was sufficient for the needy in society to come and glean. It was a simple and effective way of ensuring those who didn't have could get, they could receive. I suppose in a way like a system of wealth distribution. As God had blessed those who did have, they were able to bless others. And so here, Boaz allows Ruth to glean. Now, having said what I've said, you may think that's normal, right? Well, absolutely not. Remember, we established that Ruth was a foreigner. And not just any foreigner, a foreigner from Moab, a nation with this difficult past with Israel. And the problem with Moab was that they could not be blessed by God and enter into fellowship with him for 10 generations. What that means really simply is if a Moabite married an Israelite, they couldn't enter the assembly of God and worship for 10 generations of their family. Now, again, that point actually becomes interesting as we move forward into the story. The point is, Boaz was not legally obligated to be kind to her. And that's reflected in her question to him. Why have I found favour in your eyes that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? Ruth 2:10. The blessing of gleaning in this case was for the nation of Israel. It was a protection system to protect God's people. But Boaz here clearly understands that the people of God are meant to be a blessing to all people, especially if those people have been a blessing to God's people. And Ruth had been a blessing to Naomi. She said she would go with her back to her homeland. She said she would help her. She even said, your people will be my people, your God will be my God. Boaz understands that out of his plentiful supply, he is able to bless those less fortunate than himself. He also understands that God's kindness extends not only to Israel, but to beyond. And in this, he begins to mirror the character of God. Friends, that has to be our mandate to society. We have an obligation as believers to meet society's need, the immediate practical need. We're doing food bank. We've seen people have a need, but that can't be the be all and end all. There's only a small cross section of our church actually involved in the food bank, yet we all own it. What's my point? We can all practice this kindness, this meeting an immediate practical need. Give your neighbour a meal, look after their kids, do some shopping for them. I know this is probably beginning to sound like a broken record and that Anthony's only got one sermon, but friends, rest assured, as we walk this path together, you're going to hear a lot more of this from me, because I want every single one of us, everyone at the New Day family, to be on board with this. The proclamation of the gospel and the call to social action. What are we doing about it? Who are you speaking to right now? Who do you see less fortunate than yourself? Let's go a little bit deeper into this. Ruth 2 verse 14. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel into the wine." So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied, and had some left over. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, "Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. And also pull some out from the bundles for her, and leave it for her to glean. Do not rebuke her." So Boaz here goes beyond ensuring that she can gather a little bit of food to eat, what she needs to feed her and her mother-in-law. Boaz here blesses her as one of his workers, one of his people. He opens the door to a radical inclusion. Friends, how relevant that is now in what we're seeing in the world today with the whole Black Lives Matter movement. I won't go into all that, but what a timely example. Boaz never treats Ruth as an outsider. He includes her as God includes all who come to him. He invites her to his table to eat. He goes out of his way to bless her. He tells his workers, don't just leave the gleanings that you accidentally drop. Actually pull some of the fresh corn, the fresh barley out, and drop that on the floor so she can pick it up. And so there, if you think about that, she's getting fresh food. The things she was picking up off the floor, who knows in some ways how long it had been there. Yet he's saying, no, let's go over and above. Let's go beyond just meeting her immediate practical need. I want to bless her abundantly. What a perfect picture of God that is. Not only does he meet our needs, but he goes above and beyond. He gives us what we don't deserve. So I wonder, what are we doing to reach people beyond the norm, beyond the immediate need? I talked about giving to our neighbours and doing something practical for them, but how can we really ramp that up? How can we actually do something that genuinely costs us, that costs us time, energy, money, that includes the excluded and even treats them like family? That's what Boaz does here. He says, you're no longer a foreigner in my eyes. You're one of my own. Not only does he do that, but incredibly, he goes further still. He doesn't just meet Ruth's need in a time of distress. He doesn't just welcome her and include her in all he does, giving her what she doesn't deserve, conferring these unmerited rights upon her. Boaz goes as far as securing her long-term future. He goes beyond an interventionist mentality and goes the whole way to ensure Ruth not only has a fresh start, that's what they came to Bethlehem for, but a secure future. And I do hope, friends, this morning that language sounds very familiar to you. It should. It's the language of our church, and it's defining language. It's cultural language. And it's something that it shouldn't just be a slogan or a name to us. It should be something that we learn to live out together as we anchor ourselves in faith to the rock of Christ. let's look again at what Boaz does. And again, it's perhaps quite a confusing piece of scripture, but I will put it into context once I've read it. So it's Ruth 4 and verse 7. Now, this was custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other. And this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer says to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers, and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem, and may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. So, in their culture, when a lady or a widow had fallen on hard times, if they had a close relative, a male close relative, that male relative could redeem them, and he would basically purchase their assets and keep it in the family, if you will, so they wouldn't be impoverished and destitute. But also it would normally result in a marriage. So not only would the assets stay in the family, but the hope was, of course, that the marriage would produce an heir. And so Boaz finds this close, he is a family member of Naomi, but he finds the closest member who should be her redeemer. And he asks him, will you redeem them? And he says, well, yes. But then when he learns about Ruth the Moabite, suddenly then he's like, oh no, actually I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that because it might spoil my inheritance. Now I wonder, how many times have we done that? How many times have we basically said no and actually not understood that we've missed the great master plan of God? And as I elaborate this bit of the story, you'll begin to see what I actually mean. You see, the Redeemer talks his way out of God's master plan, and then Boaz comes in and he redeems Ruth and Naomi. Okay, this is the super interesting part, and it's where you see God's master plan in action. Boaz is from Bethlehem. He's the tribe of Judah, and Ruth, this unfortunate foreigner, finds herself not only involved in God's plan for the rescue of his people, but she finds herself right at the centre, a massive part of it. You see, both Boaz and Ruth father Obed. Obed fathers Jesse, and Jesse fathers David, King David, the great king of Israel, the man to whom God says, I will establish your throne forever. And how does he do that? Well, Jesus is from the tribe of Judah, is from the line of David. He sits on David's eternally established throne. So what we see here is that Jesus, in fact, is a direct descendant of a simple asylum-seeking refugee fleeing from famine. Literally just because Boaz dared to think outside of the box and say yes. This is where we see God's heart for the poor and afflicted. God isn't just interested in meeting our immediate need. He's not just simply looking to include the unfortunate. He's looking to the eternal. And with Ruth, he does it in the most marvelous fashion, making her this integral part of his redemptive master plan. No one from the people of God could have seen that. Israel was his people, but here God shows that Everyone and anyone can be and should be included, and anything less is but a cheap counterfeit. Friends, we've got to do the same. Yes, we need to meet that immediate need. Yes, we've got to include people in our innermost intimacy. But we've also got to allow them to be part of our destiny and legacy. We've got to share everything with them. And in doing that, secure their future. You see, your salvation doesn't belong to you. It belongs to God. And he merely gives it us to give away. It's scriptural. Scriptures tell us salvation belongs to the Lord. So, wow. What does this all look like? What does the poor look like? May not always be material. As I said at the start, we've got to consider those less fortunate than ourselves in the current climate, and we may be very surprised what that actually looked like. But if our eyes are open, Lord willing, we will see an opportunity to serve God and extend his kingdom to others, and they see the beauty and the radiance of it. Boaz saw that Ruth was materially poor. He met her need, but he also went on to help secure her long-term future. He demonstrated the clear character of Christ in her. I have talked, of course, about Ruth getting more than she deserved and how blessed she was to receive the favour of God, and Boaz particularly. But that actually shouldn't really surprise us when we look at the beautiful heart of Ruth. And it's something I've not delved into as I've spoken this morning. Because although Ruth was in great need herself, she still sought to serve others in their distress, seeing their need as greater than hers. And friends, I'd like to suggest this morning that that's when we know our hearts are right with God, when we can put our pain aside to serve others in theirs. I want to leave you with a verse, and it's Matthew 5:3, where Jesus is teaching the Sermon on the Mount, and he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And he's not talking about people who are unspiritual, far from it. He's saying because of their spirituality, it doesn't matter what circumstances they find themselves in. They've a humility and an acceptance of life. They see the potential and the possibility in everything. They recognize their own poverty in the light and the weight of the glory of God. And they're a can-do people. They're a going and a growing people. And that's who Ruth is. Friends, I hope that's been helpful to you this morning. I hope it challenges us. I hope it makes us think, that we then don't get too comfortable as we come back. And I hope we can all mobilize to action and continue the great work the church has been doing in this really difficult time. God bless you, and I can honestly say now, really look forward to seeing you very, very soon.